Hey, welcome to the Co-Housing podcast. I'm your host, Charles Durrett. I want to give you an introduction to today's episode, if you will. In 1975, a bureaucrat named Philip Octanter in Denmark decided to take co-housing to the nonprofit housing world. In 1978, Tingalton 90-unit project was built of 12 to 17 families, 90 units total. It changed the nature of nonprofit housing in Denmark itself. Interesting contrast between Denmark and US. It got national press. Almost every newspaper of any size wrote about this new housing project because people in that country want to see nonprofit housing projects be viable. The Danes are simply proud of not only co-housing, but of high functioning housing projects in general. They just take a lot of regard for it. And they don't always hit it on the mark, but when they do, like Tingoen, it gets an immense amount of press. My experience in Denmark was when the local press and then the national press adopted housing innovations as a story, that things shifted there immensely. And we have a problem in this country that we kind of want to sweep nonprofit projects under the carpet because we don't want Americans to know that we're paying for it. We need to change that. And hopefully today, because it's when the society accepts it as a norm, a high functioning neighborhood as nonprofit housing project, community and the well being of the seniors and the children, et cetera, then that's when it gets adopted broadly. The project that my guest today and I are going to talk about is really the first attempt to introduce co-housing to the nonprofit housing realm in the US. My guest today is Nazin. She's a member of the AIA, the American Institutes of Architects, LEED certified registered architect with over 20 years of experience in sustainable design, construction, and community development across North America and the Middle East. She holds a master's degree in architecture and business administration and a PhD in community engagement and leadership. Her architect's thesis won Best Feasibility Project, and her MBA won the Paul Edwards Human Relations Award. She has led numerous large-scale projects and has overseen more than 35 adaptive reuse and affordable housing developments. And frankly, she's an amazing person. Nazin, welcome. How are you?
I, I'm very well, thank you.
Nazin finished her PhD a year ago. I was at her defense of her PhD. It was a fantastic presentation along with her jury members. And it was a contrast between the rehabilitation of a nonprofit housing project, a subsidized housing project in Pittsburgh, and a new housing project in California designed by this office. It's called Valley View Senior Homes. It is a nonprofit residential neighborhood very much modeled after a co-housing. First of all, let me ask Nazin, what led you to your path of design? What led you towards that direction?
That's a great question. So, my path really grew out of my work as an architect and my interest in how the built environment shapes people's lives. For more than 2 decades, I've worked on urban redevelopment, affordable housing, and the adaptive reuse of historic buildings. Through that experience, I started noticing that two places could be equally well designed physically, but the experience of living there could be completely different. In some places, people felt connected and supported, while in others, people felt isolated. And that realization made me curious about how design can actually influence social life and well being within communities. And that's why I picked that topic for my dissertation.
It's a critical topic for your PhD and so critical to learn about because we spend 20 million here and 20 million there for two different projects, and one project facilitates community immensely and one detracts from community immensely. I mean, we've had to tear down nonprofit housing projects in the US because they work so poorly. So you would think that learning how to make them well would be a priority. Do you have any thoughts about why Valley View hasn't gotten the kind of press that it might have gotten if people realized how important it was as a model?
So one of the things that immediately stood out to me about Valley View senior homes compared to many other low income housing developments I've studied was the sense of harmony in the environment, the use of colors, the scale of the buildings, the wayfinding elements, and the way spaces were organized created a very welcoming atmosphere. I noticed small gatherings happening naturally in different corners of the property. The neighbors were talking on porches or meeting along the pathways, while larger gatherings took place in the common house, which they referred as clubhouse. So what was remarkable was how the design supported both types of interactions, informal everyday encounters as well as organized community activities. In many housing developments, those opportunities for interaction are limited. But here, the environment seemed to actively encouraging social connections.
Fantastic. And thank you for mentioning that because that certainly was a huge priority in the design of that project. And I understand for profit, it's one of the easiest projects that they have to manage because there's so much harmony there and so much participation among the residents. And it's very healthy participation in that the nonprofit collaborates with the residents to manage it. And the part of the reason they're able to do that, unlike any of the other projects that they develop, is that it was designed to make people feel super comfortable. They're not part of an institution. They live in a house that they plan to live in forever, etc.
Yeah, and one of the most striking aspects of your project was the way it offered residents a wide range of choices. I mean, not just for the interaction, like for everything. So people can use stairs as just climbing up the stairs to get to the second floor. But at the same time, I saw people using the stairs to do exercise. So there are lots of choices within your design.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. Some of them were on purpose and some of them were accidental, because that's one project, except for 6 units, we had to make it 100% handicap accessible, which was fine, but it cost a lot to do that. And since it's rental, we might have made it a third handicap accessible and been able to build two, but that's another story. In other words, it often comes down to why is there not enough low income housing project built in the US? And some people would argue that if you don't have the money to do it right the first time, then you set yourself up for so many lawsuits that people very much reticent to do it. This project was made by a lot of commitment and a lot of realization that doing it right the first time was going to cost it a lot less down the line. So, how do we reach more nonprofits so that they start to feel like community is the answer? If there is any answer, that's the answer.
From what I've learned through my research, one area where nonprofit housing providers could improve is in being like more flexible, more open when considering different housing models and design approaches. So, as you know, that the building that I uh, evaluated and compared to your project was just an ordinary standard 6-story building with double loaded corridors and a foyer and a community room for gatherings. So very, very standard apartment. So I hope many after this research, I hope that nonprofit will consider more flexibility when designing building for low income seniors, so specifically seniors. Many organizations understandably work within strict regulations and funding frameworks, but there's still room to explore alternative approaches that prioritize social well being as much as affordability. And another important improvement would be involving residents more directly in the design and decision making process. The building that I reviewed, they had the chance to involve the residents, but they never used it. So it was like a big renovation project. They never asked residents, well, how they feel about the building that they have lived in. So, the people who live in these communities understand their daily needs better than anyone else. When developers and nonprofits work closely with end users from the beginning, they can create environments that function much better in the long term. Even after residents move in, they can facilitate the interactions by arranging town halls or bringing specialists to conduct workshops for residents to help them creating meaningful connections.
That's brilliant, Nazin, and that's the crux of why we're here today, frankly. We passed the Fair Housing Act, allow for resident participation, future resident participation, but they also say it's allowable to do a lottery to choose the residents. And in the more ideological 60s and 70s, there was more participation. Probably 4 out of 10 had public presentation. Now, there's an expediency involved and more than anything else, a bias towards what lends towards expediency because I find participation doesn't slow down projects. In fact, it speeds up projects because there's so much ownership. And when real people are involved, everybody senses the necessity, the urgency of getting housing built. Anyway, today it's less than one for every 10 projects has public presentation involved in the design of it. And it's kind of frustrating because, for me, I've designed 55 co-housing, probably an equal number of nonprofit housing projects. And I always argue that I get it done faster when I have the future residents on board, and it's better when the future residents are on board. I've also found that it's actually very doable to renovate a building and have people involved, and it goes a long ways toward building community because it's so critical in my mind.
One memory that stays with me and it stayed with me for many was that we I was involved. I was part of the decision making people for one building, and it was a senior. It was a hot funded senior housing, and we were the group that were talking about the future of the building because people basically the building failed in many aspects, didn't serve the purpose anymore. So we were talking, we had our circle, and then there was one older lady out of our circle carefully listening to our conversation. And then when we acknowledged her presence, she said she wants to be involved. She said, "You're talking about my building, the way the place that I'm living, and no one asked my opinion. No one asked the residents' opinion." And then, so that actually was something that stayed with me as why we are doing this when we are not asking any of the residents how they feel. I think this is important. So what is makes me hopeful is just there are more people beginning to recognize that housing is not just about providing units; it's about creating environments where people can live meaningful and connected lives. I see growing interest from designers, developers, communities in models that prioritize social well-being, involving residents, future residents, current residents, involving sustainability, shared responsibilities.
Wow, that's exactly right, and there's so many things that brings to the table. For example, ownership. They're careful with the landscaping because they basically co-own the landscape, if not financially, emotionally. They know it. It's important. To that extent, we've often used some participation with helping to plant the landscaping and some participation, like at Valley View, to build the trellis and to build the picnic tables with the residents and gardens because it just takes a little bit of participation on the physical side to get ownership, but it takes a lot of participation in the decision-making realm to get ownership. And when facilitated well, it goes very quickly and it's palpable. You feel people growing to love where they live and live where they love in such a more meaningful way than just here's your key, there's your unit, sayonara. Can you recount any specific behaviors at Valley View that demonstrated that point of view? For example, I'm always surprised when I go out there. I mean, of 70 units, there's like 5 or 6 front porches where people are communing together. They have a very generous common house, and day in and day out, there's people communing there. Anything else that comes to mind when you think of Valley View?
Yes, I mean there's so many aspects of your design that stood out. So I think the way that the buil- that the property, the community approached the storytelling is really magnificent. So you had designed a fireplace with this slates from other projects. This is just kind of a salvage slates from the roof of another project. And there's all actually the story of that on the side of the fireplace. So you can just see every piece of this property has a story. Then when you go to the common house, all the walls are covered by the picture and a short story of each resident. The short story of how this resident ended up here and how they feel about living there. And it's all framed nicely and put on the walls. This means that these people are valued and they have a dignified living there. They are recognized as the residents. Um, so I think that, and then that community space, that clubhouse or common house that you design is a very flexible space. So it's not just for formal gatherings, it's also for workshops. I mean, the way it's been designed can support many different activities. The way that you have placed the social coordinator office, the property manager's office, and that the transparency. So they're like uh, glass doors, and everything is transparent, so people can see who's going inside the office, what's happening there. Most of the senior housing that I have reviewed, uh, as a concern, came out of my interviews with residents is the transparency, because they want to see what's happening. So this is very important to the senior residents, and your design followed that. I don't know if you have ever uh, reviewed the book called Planning and Managing Housing for Elderly. It was written by Dr. Lawton in 1975. All the details that book asked designers to consider was in your design. So I was
Oh,
very
that's cool.
surprised when I was reviewing the book. Like I was just it was saying that when you design, like when you evaluate senior housing and you interview senior residents, you need to observe them rather than just talk to them, because most of the time these people behave differently rather than what they say. So, and I did that. That was something that I saw in your design. So there are details, very tiny details that you had considered. And then these people say something, but when I looked at them, I saw that it's different. For example, one resident that was telling me that she feels disconnected because she doesn't speak English. But when I observed her behavior in the 3 days that I was there, I noticed that she is very connected. She's always in every community activity within the clubhouse. She was actually coming to the clubhouse all 3 days that I was there. I think that that means something, even though the person might say that they are disconnected, but that it was the design was just so interactive that the resident was actually participating in every community activity, even though that she doesn't speak English.
That's brilliant. I mean, just the fact that you sat in the common house and saw how people were coming and going. That's how I learned about co-housing for 13 months in Europe, and spending that time, because it's through those observations that you learn the vast majority of appropriate design. It's actually all very well articulated in the book called The Solution to Homelessness in Your Town, and it's actually all about that project, and by the way, there's the fireplace discussed by, Nazin, and thank you for having it. I actually still stay in contact with people at Valley View. Many of them have my phone number, and I'm so always so happy when somebody calls me up and says, "Oh, we just got a new covey of quails that have moved into our community," etcetera. Here's another problem stated by that project. Um, I spent an immense amount of time trying to figure out how to use those existing retaining walls because That building solution could have never been cost effective if they hadn't figured out how to use the existing retaining walls, because taking them out would have been millions. There were 25 retaining walls. The drainage, using the existing drainage, which would have been, just cost preclusive to put in brand new. So I'm pretty sure that project would have never been built without spending that upfront time just analyzing the real problem. And I kind of find that even getting architects to go study the reality of the site that they're considering is a big impediment to actually doing. I mean, I know many architects who have tried to solve a problem without actually visiting the site, and that's the beginning of the problem. I mean, any all 28 of the other solutions had torn those retaining walls out, which the contractors just said that would have cost too many millions of dollars, and that project would have never been built. So anyway, do you have any thoughts about, how do we help architects imagine getting motivated to present and think through social solutions, but thinking through technical solutions first?
So, well, this is a very important issue because the cost always the most important thing, right? I mean, it just especially when you're working with nonprofits and usually when they utilize public fundings. So the cost is the most important factor. And I think you mentioned the retaining wall, and I have exactly the same scenario. A project, it's a big block that used to be single family housings, and they were all demolished many years ago. And now it's been developed for public housing, and it's going to serve like 100 something units. The cost to remove these retaining walls is about $6 to $7 million just
Six
to
to
get
seven
rid.
million.
Yes,
That's
just to
about what it
get
would
rid
have
of.
cost in Nevada City. Yeah, just to get rid of
All
them.
right. So what I was suggesting was these architects, I gave them a copy of your book. I said, Listen, this is exactly the same scenario in California. You need to go and check that out. See how Chuck Durrett has solved that problem because this is very similar. The topography of the land and then how the retaining walls are placed is very similar to your project. And I mean, especially architects, when they want to look at that, any new project, just search quick research, look at the similar projects. So say like, is there any other project that had a similar scenario?
Hmm.
So that's exactly how I found your project. And I think when you are a designer, you can easily find similar projects and similar, especially with this a massive cost for just removing retaining walls. Why we don't use them because we think of sustainability here, so we think of cost saving. So just go and look at the best practices around the world. And I think that would be the best thing. And, there are not too many architects like you. You have been so generous with the decades of experience that you have authored and gathered in your books. I have all your books. I don't know if I ever mentioned that to you because you're like one of the most generous architects I have ever seen. You're sharing your knowledge, and most of the architects don't do that. They just want to keep the knowledge to themselves because knowledge is a power. So I think this is great that there are some architects like you that they have shared the knowledge that their decades of experience, great experience with other people. Your workshops, your courses, everything that you offer today, I think it's a great way for younger architects to participate and learn from.
Well, thank you so much. I so appreciate that. I mean, the art of social architecture is a workout. It seems like it's a little bit harder, but like you say, all the various books do adequate training in that regard. So
Mhm.
I hope they pick up the book about Valley View. I hope they go visit projects. And I hope that people imagine that they're part of a culture, and a culture that is hungry for better housing solutions, hungry for high functioning neighborhoods, hungry for places not only for seniors, but for children and families to thrive. And I think that it's so doable and yet lost. And therefore, people are watching a lot of TV and looking at a lot of screen time because they don't have an engaging neighborhood. I feel increasingly my job is to, set other people up for success into designing socially relevant projects. In general, I think of projects like Valley View as not just co-housing, it's kind of the legacy of co-housing. In other words, our possibilities of not only passing it on to other people, but passing it on to other architecture types, which is not the kind of participation that goes into regular co-housing where it's literally 30 or 40 families get together and co-design a neighborhood, but it's where 30 or 50 families get together in the context of a nonprofit rentals and make it of its highest potential. And when I think about co-housing, I think it makes the possibility of making a more civilized society. So the best we can do is make as many civilized neighborhoods as we possibly can. And in my view, talking to each other and solving problems together is the norm, not the exception to the norm. Is there a topic about marrying affordable housing with the lessons of co-housing that you think we have not yet covered today?
Uh, One idea that probably I would add is I mentioned Dr. Lawton's book and theory. So Dr. Lawton called for a unified interdisciplinary federal housing policy back in 1975. So, and yet no one has done it yet. And when you're designing for any age group, but in particular, because of my dissertation for elderly, and then the elderly is low income from a very like different socioeconomic background. You need to consider many other aspects, not just, as you mentioned, just providing a unit, a shelter. You need to incorporate into the design many other disciplines.
Before we go much further, would you do me a favor and tell me where people can find your exquisite dissertation for your PhD called Enriching Social Well-Being Through the Built Environment, Assessing Housing Models' Impact on the Elderly Residents in Government Subsidized Housing?
So basically, you can Google my name, Nazin Bagherynejad, on Google Scholars, and then you can just find the topic and you just click on it, and it's open source. It's in on ProQuest. You can download the whole research.
Great. And one of the reasons that's so important, I got a call from the assistant director of the housing authority in Washington, D.C. And then I got a follow-up call from the assistant director and the director who wanted me to come to Washington, D.C. This was before the current administration, because they pay $10,000 a year just to manage per house in Washington, D.C. Per unit, it costs them $10,000 a year to manage it. Washington, D.C. has about 7,000 units that they manage, and we've done nonprofit projects where the residents play a huge role in the management, and I just feel like it's missing as a possibility for most nonprofits and city housing authorities is throughout the US. Do you have any thoughts about lowering government costs by recruiting the residents to do their own management?
Well, the other important concept is giving residents meaningful roles and responsibilities within their communities. When residents are encouraged to contribute, whether through organizing activities, helping maintain shared spaces, mentoring neighborhoods, or participating in decision making, it strengthens the sense of belonging and purpose that many older adults value. We can also learn a great deal from practices implemented in other countries like Denmark, UK, Canada. There are housing models that incorporate volunteer engagement or time based exchange systems that the resident contribute time or services to the community instead of financial payments. So, I think not only that would lower the cost for the housing authorities, also give the residents better sense of community. And then the other thing is that when people socially connected, they actually support each other. So there are different level of support, and it could be just through appraisal, through information, through like instrumental supports. When people have the neighbors support them, it lower down the cost for the government, the Medicaid cost will be lower if there is a neighbor can give them a lift to the grocery or to the doctor appointment. There's no need to call Medicaid and ask for transportation. The decision that designers make at the time of design can influence the cost for the government, like for many years.
Indeed. And to that extent, because it's not just the physical design, it's also the social design that plays a big role. Currently, correct me if I'm wrong, Nazin, but your research is focused on developing a national policy framework for senior affordable housing aimed at integrating sustainability, affordability, and community engagement into housing solutions for older adults.
Yeah, I ultimately I believe the housing should be understood not just as a physical structure, but as part of a social ecosystem. When we combining thoughtful design, interdisciplinary knowledge, supporting supportive policies, and meaningful resident participation, we can create housing environments where older adults remain connected, engaged, and valued. And you just mentioned I'm working on a national policy framework for senior affordable housing, and it's an ongoing research. And I am working with academia, practitioners, gerontologists, and many other interdisciplinary disciplines. So just in general, I wish more people understand that the housing for older adults is not just providing a safe and affordable unit. It's more about supporting social well-being and cognitive health and dignity as people age. So, in many housing discussion, the focus is understandably on affordability and construction cost or the number of units we can produce. But those are very important issues. But my research shows that the design of the environment and opportunities for social connection within the environment are just as important.
Amen, sister. So I'm going to wrap this up, and I want to thank you very, very much for your
No, thank you so
participation with
much.
this
It was an
today.
honor.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us on the Co-Housing Podcast. If you're looking to learn more about co-housing and building a sustainable community, high-functioning neighborhoods, you can find more resources at cohousingco.com. And if this conversation resonated with you at all, please consider subscribing and sharing it with somebody interested in living in a sustainable neighborhood where people know each other, care about each other, and support each other. Until then, next time, I'm Charles Durrett. Thanks for being part of our conversation today.